Have you ever heard of someone who was considered a complete failure and ended up defying gravity? Well, yes. While the world mocked him, he levitated, literally. And it wasn't a trick. It was an illusion or theater. These were flights documented by popes, nobles, and even a Protestant prince who, upon witnessing one of these scenes, converted on the spot. His name? Saint Joseph of Cupertino, a man who was born into poverty, rejected by his own mother and ridiculed by colleagues who thought he was good for nothing, but who ended up leaving the entire world speechless with his holiness. Now here's the point. How did someone with so many limitations become one of the greatest mystics in the history of the church? Why did he fly? What was going on in the heart of a man like that? And most importantly, what does all this have to do with your life today? Because maybe you're feeling limited, without direction, not knowing if God can really use you with everything you carry inside. And this is where this story gives you an answer that no coach would give you. In this video, you will delve into the mysteries of a life that seems like something out of a fantasy book, but that was real, recorded, studied, and canonized. Get ready, because what you're going to see here is not just a biography of a saint. It is a mirror that can completely transform the way you see your own failures, and maybe, just maybe, make you fly too. The story of Saint Joseph of Cupertino begins in a place where few would like to be born, on the fringes of society. He came into the world in a world of scarcity, where there was no beauty, intelligence, influence, or even affection from his own mother. He grew up being the butt of jokes and synonymous with failure. He is like that child who, from an early age, is seen as a burden, a lost cause. But, unlike many, Joseph had something that cannot be learned from books, a soul that was absurdly sensitive to the sacred. He not only believed in God, he felt God with such great intensity that it paralyzed his body. And this sensitivity began early. Imagine a child who, upon seeing an image of the Virgin Mary or hearing the name of Jesus, simply lost connection with the world around him, as if he had been pulled to another plane. This happened to him, and it was so obvious that his classmates nicknamed him Open Mouth. And before anyone thinks this is an exaggeration, think about how some people get deeply moved just by listening to a song or remembering a loved one. Now multiply that by 1,000, and you will have an idea of what Joseph experienced spiritually. He didn't fake it. He lived a faith so real that his body couldn't contain it. Many people wonder why they feel a spiritual void even when they go to church, pray, or try to follow a path of faith. Maybe they lack what Joseph had in abundance, intensity in his surrender. He had nothing that the world values, but he offered everything he had to heaven. And if you have ever felt excluded, ridiculed, misunderstood, maybe you are closer to a miracle than you think, because heaven begins to move even when the earth seems not to recognize you. And if that surprised you, wait until you see how this unprepared man was ordained a priest. Saint Joseph of Cupertino was the kind of person who, by the world's standards, would have no chance of passing anything. His studies were a veritable minefield. He had serious cognitive limitations, was easily distracted, was always lost in ecstasies during class, and could barely follow his teacher's reasoning. He was like that student who spends more time looking out the window than at the board, not because he was lazy, but because he was immersed in a world that only he could see. For anyone, it would be impossible to pass a test as demanding as that of priestly ordination. But with God, impossible is just a word. The most well-known miracle of his life happened at that very moment. Joseph only knew one verse of the Bible by heart. Blessed are the breasts that nursed you. And that was exactly the question the examiner asked. Now think about it. What are the chances of that happening by coincidence? It's like studying just one page, 1,000-chapter book, and getting exactly that one. That's not a coincidence. That's divine intervention. And do you know why this moves us so much? Because it shows that heaven does not demand intellectual perfection, but a surrender heart. It is a clear sign that when you do your part, no matter how small, God covers the rest with grace. This story speaks directly to anyone who has ever been stuck in an interview, blanked on a test, or felt incapable of achieving a dream because they thought they were stupid, slow, insufficient. If Joseph passed, you can too. It is not about relying on miracles, but about trusting that when your faith is real and your surrender is sincere, heaven will open doors for you. Now, The most impressive thing is that even after this miracle, his life continued to be a testing ground, because a true vocation needs to go through fire, and that is where the most challenging part of your journey begins. Imagine feeling, deep down in your soul, that you were born to serve God, but every door you knock on closes in your face. That's exactly what Joseph faced. He tried to join several religious orders and was rejected by all of them. He was considered a walking disaster. He didn't know how to serve at the table without dropping the plates. He mixed up the bread. He disrupted the routine of the convents with his constant ecstasies. No one wanted to deal with him. Even his mother, tired of her son's defeats, treated him harshly. And even so, he didn't give up. He persisted, as if he knew he had a calling that only God could explain. After being rejected so many times, Joseph was accepted as a kind of servant in the convent of the conventual Franciscans. And look how interesting. He started out taking care of the mules. That's right, the mules. While many dream of pulpits and titles, Joseph started out in the stable, literally. But it was there in simplicity that his spirituality began to shine. The brothers noticed something different about him, something that could not be explained with human logic. Even though he was clumsy, his prayer was deep, his dedication was sincere. That man who was good for nothing began to be recognized as someone full of God. And that is the point. God does not choose you based on your performance, but on your disposition. The convent that welcomed him at first did so out of mercy, not merit. But when grace acts, even the act of pity becomes a stage for miracles. It is as if God said, "Leave it to me, and I will show you what I can do with a broken heart." And he did, because the same Joseph who took care of the mules would soon be flying in full ecstasy during a mass. And it is not a metaphor. It is literal. But before talking about flights, we need to understand how these phenomena began to shock even the most skeptical. Now get ready, because what you are about to hear here is not an invention or an exaggeration of faith. It is history recorded by eyewitnesses, including popes, princes, and cardinals. St. Joseph of Cupertino was so deeply taken in ecstasy that his body literally levitated. And it wasn't just once or twice. No, it was hundreds of times. In the middle of Mass, upon hearing the name of Jesus, or in front of an image of the Virgin Mary, Joseph would simply disconnect from reality and rise. That's right, he floated. And the most incredible thing is that these episodes didn't happen in secret. They happened in front of crowds. One of the most emblematic stories happened in Assisi. Joseph was taken to the Basilica of St. Francis. Upon seeing a painting of Our Lady, he opened his arms with such love that he began to rise from the ground as if he were going to embrace her. People screamed, others fell to their knees, and no one ever forgot that scene. In another episode, a Protestant prince, who didn't believe in any of this, was so impressed by seeing the levitation that he ended up converting to Catholicism. It was impossible to deny. What was seen in Joseph was not a show. It was the sky giving a visible sign that faith surpasses the laws of physics. But of course, so many supernatural manifestations also generated suspicion. The church, always prudent, investigated everything thoroughly. And do you know what it found? Consistent testimonies, detailed records, and no evidence of fraud. The levitations were not a spectacle to promote Joseph's image. On the contrary, he was ashamed of the fame and always said that everything came from God. His humility contrasted with the grandeur of the signs. And this humility will appear even stronger in the upcoming events. Because even though he was a saint who flew, Joseph was also the man who preferred to take care of mules and to deal with coins. Even with all his extraordinary gifts, St. Joseph of Cupertino never allowed himself to be conceited. He remained that simple man, without vanity, who accepted any task with gratitude. It was common to see him taking care of the convent's mules, cleaning stables or carrying water, as if it were a privilege. And he really saw it that way. His greatness was not in what he did, but in how he did it, with love, dedication, and obedience. His obedience was so profound that, once, when faced with a woman possessed by an evil spirit, Joseph simply showed a letter of authorization from a superior and said, "If you don't want to leave, that's fine. But I came in the name of holy obedience." The demon left immediately. This type of spiritual authority does not come from nowhere. It comes from a soul shaped by humility, fidelity, and total renunciation. And when I say total renunciation, I am not just saying it. Joseph had such an aversion to money that he even felt physically ill just because he had a coin hidden in his habit. A colleague put the coin there as a joke. In a short time, Joseph became breathless and pale, and only felt better when they found and removed the coin from his clothes. It was as if the mere touch of the money disturbed his spiritual peace. It wasn't an act. It was sensitivity. It was holiness. He was someone who chose to depend solely on divine providence. And don't think that this made him alienated. Quite the opposite. His firmness of spirit transformed into powerful advice and accurate discernment. He knew how to listen. He knew how to perceive what others hid, even from themselves. And this made him a true instrument of conversion. Ordinary and powerful people sought guidance from him, and almost always left transformed. But where did this profound perception come from? From a rare and precious gift that we will now understand better, because what came after the levitations was the gift of reading souls. It was not easy for the church to officially recognize the miracles and sanctity of Saint Joseph of Cupertino. His life itself was already a provocation to rationalism. A man who levitated, who could divine thoughts, who could cast out demons with a letter. This required an extremely rigorous process. And that is exactly what happened. Hundreds of witnesses, including bishops, cardinals, and even Pope Urban VIII, were heard to prove the authenticity of the phenomena. Every detail of Joseph's life was scrutinized. And yet, the more research was done, the more his sanctity became evident with undeniable force. In addition to the miracles, his heroic virtues were analyzed, his obedience, which was almost radical, his humility, which disarmed any pride, his poverty, which he embraced with pleasure, and his chastity, which he treasured. One of the most beautiful details of the canonization process was the consistency of the accounts of his levitations. There were so many, so varied, from so many different sources, nobles, religious, common people, that it became impossible to deny. It was as if the heavens were shouting in unison, "This man belongs to us." But the most impressive thing was not his flights. It was the fact that, even with all this, he never stopped feeling small. He never used his gifts to exalt himself. It was as if he were saying, "It's not me, it's God who does it." And so, in 1767, Joseph was canonized by Pope Clement XIII. But more than a title, his canonization was the officialization of a truth that the people already knew, that open-mouthed man, ridiculed in childhood, was an instrument chosen by God. And to this day, he continues to be a beacon especially for students who turned his intercession in times of tests, decisions, and insecurity. The question that remains is, would his faith be enough to move heaven in the face of so many limitations? But wait, because before you answer, you need to know the beginning of this story. And now, with all this ready, it's time to open with impact. And now that you have learned the story of St. Joseph of Cupertino, let me ask you a direct question. How long will you continue to believe that you need to be perfect to be used by God? How long will you hide your defects in shame, thinking that they disqualify you? Look at this man's life. He was not strong, nor handsome, nor intelligent, nor influential, and yet God chose him. Doesn't this show you that maybe you are demanding things of yourself that heaven never required? Joseph's big turning point was when he stopped fighting to be what was expected of him and decided to give himself completely. And that's what I want to encourage you to do now. What would happen if, instead of trying to appear strong all the time, you accepted your fragility as a starting point, not as the end of the line? God doesn't look for perfect people. He looks for people who are available. Are you available? So tell me in the comments, what in this story touched you the most? Which part spoke directly to your heart? Let's talk about it, because this channel exists to help you grow in faith, purpose, and understanding that you are also made for greater things. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Here, every week, there is deep, real, and transparent